September 1st, 1939, Nazi Germany unleashed a new doctrine with devastating results. Armored spearheads penetrated deep into enemy territory, encircling and annihilating Polish forces within weeks. Less than a year later, German Panzer Divisions were racing through the Ardennes forest and wiping French armies off the map. Blitzkrieg was the future, and the future was now. The United States Army raced to respond with this looming threat as political relations deteriorated and the road to war became evident. A new doctrine was needed, and fast. In early 1941, the War Department inaugurated a unique military concept, the tank destroyer. It would emphasize rapid response in concentrated numbers, firepower, and mobility over heavy armor. This doctrine would be a specialized force to quickly engage enemy armor and eliminate their threat to any U.S. forces. The U.S. was confident in their new doctrine and would put it to the test in the European theater against Hitler's most feared Panzer Divisions. After the fall of France in the summer of 1940, it became evident that the German success was the result of the superior conduct of tank warfare. The Germans actually had fewer tanks than the French and the British, but were far more skillful in their deployment. There was absolutely nothing that could stop their panzers. This reality instilled a deep fear in the American military ranks of facing such a formidable force in future battles. Not only did the Army lack an appropriate arsenal to defend against German tanks, but it was also uncertain about how to organize its defense, whether to rely on tanks, towed artillery, or mobile anti-tank guns. The question sparked a lively debate within American military circles, with various commanders proposing different solutions. The idea of using mobile anti-tank guns to counter German panzer attacks first emerged in September 1940. By May 1941, General George Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, formally endorsed the creation of mobile anti-tank units. He envisioned self-propelled mounts that prioritized mobility, heavy armament, and minimal armor. Following General Marshall's guidelines, the War Department established the Tank Destroyer Command at Fort Meade, Maryland. This command became the central hub for developing tank destroyer doctrine, designing equipment, and training personnel. Within this unit, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew D. Bruce emerged as a key advocate for self-propelled armored anti-tank vehicles. Although Bruce's ideas were supported by most officers in the Tank Destroyer Command, the Army faced a significant problem. It had no suitable vehicle for the role. The two designs introduced to meet the immediate need for tank destroyers were, to say the least, inadequate. The first was the 37mm gun motor carriage M6. A 3/4-ton Dodge truck fitted with a 37mm M3 anti-tank gun mounted in its bed. Due to this configuration, the gun could only be fired to the rear. The second, more advanced design was the M3 gun motor carriage, a 75mm self-propelled gun based on the chassis of the M3 half-track. While it featured a more powerful forward-firing weapon, the M3 GMC lacked sufficient armored protection. Additionally, soldiers in the cabin were fully exposed to enemy fire. Clearly, these two designs could only serve as temporary solutions until a dedicated tank destroyer could be developed. The Ordnance Department was actively working to develop a suitable design that could meet the demands of modern anti-tank warfare. In November 1941, they proposed a turreted tank destroyer design featuring a 3-inch gun from the M6 heavy tank mounted on the chassis of an M4A2 medium tank. The prototype was designated as the 3-inch gun motor carriage T-35. After undergoing a series of trials and design modifications, the Army selected the improved T-35E1 version on May 2, 1942. A month later, it entered service as the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10. The M10 tank destroyer was designed to overcome enemy tanks with speed and firepower. However, achieving greater speed could come only at the cost of reduced armor. The reduced armor caused the M10 to weigh 65,200 pounds, 1,600 pounds less than the M4A1 early production Sherman tank. The M10's glacis plate was at 1.5 inches thick and sloped at 55 degrees to enhance its effectiveness against incoming fire. The sides and rear of the upper hull were 3/4 inch thick and sloped at 38 degrees. Such armor thickness made the M10 vulnerable to most German anti-tank weapons. The turret had a pentagonal design with a 1-inch thick slide sloped at 15 degrees. The gun shield was the thickest part of the armor, measuring 2¼ inches and sloped at 45 degrees. However, the open-top design of the turret left the crew vulnerable to small arms fire and shrapnel, further highlighting the M10's susceptibility in close combat. The M10 was powered by the General Motors 6046 twin-engine system, which produced 375 horsepower and could operate on a single engine if the other was damaged. Interestingly, the turret relied on a manual rotation system. While this feature contributed to the vehicle's mechanical simplicity, it significantly hindered the turret's responsiveness in combat situations. The M10 had a 5-man crew comprising a commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver. The driver and assistant driver were seated in the front hull and relied on periscopes for visibility. The commander, gunner, and loader operated within the turret. Although folding seats were provided for these positions, the gunner and loader typically stood to perform their duties. The turret was equipped with a powerful 3-inch M19 gun, an anti-aircraft weapon adapted for an anti-tank role, much like the Germans' use of their 8.8cm flak gun. Even though it was a powerful piece of weaponry, the gun turned out to be the biggest drawback of the M10. It was too heavy. The gun's weight caused an imbalance in the turret, which became particularly problematic on slopes. On inclinations greater than 4 degrees, the vehicle was prone to tipping over. This serious issue prompted engineers to implement several modifications in an attempt to resolve it. Ultimately, they devised a solution by attaching a counterweight to the upper rear turret plate. Due to its distinctive shape, this counterweight became known as the duckbill. While the counterweight successfully resolved the balance issue, it added 2,500 pounds to the vehicle's overall weight, negating the M10's initial weight advantage. Additionally, the added weight increased the strain on the manual turret rotation system, further impacting its effectiveness. Unlike a standard tank, the turret of the M10 lacked a flexible machine gun over the assistant driver's seat or a coaxially mounted machine gun paired with a main gun. The only additional weapon was a .50 caliber machine gun mounted at the rear of the turret. To operate it, the commander had to fully expose himself to enemy fire. Furthermore, its rear-mounted position limited its functionality as the gun could not be depressed enough to effectively engage enemies at close range. The Tank Destroyer Command expressed dissatisfaction with the M10 tank destroyer design from the outset. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Bruce, head of the command, was reluctant to approve its standardization, viewing it as an expedient rather than optimal solution. Despite Bruce's objections, the Army proceeded with the M10's adoption. By February 1943, the M10 had been deployed to combat zones. Its first operational use occurred in Tunisia during the North African campaign. The 899th and 601st Tank Destroyer Battalions engaged with enemy M10s for the first time at the Battle of El Ghadar on March 23, 1943. In this encounter, American forces successfully repelled an attack by the German 10th Panzer Division, destroying 30 enemy tanks. However, this victory came at the cost of 35 American vehicles lost in the battle. Following the fighting at El Ghadar, tank encounters diminished as German forces refrained from using tanks in large numbers. This caused the tank destroyer units to modify their role by employing the M10s as artillery support. In Italy, things quickly went back to the way they were, and M10s found themselves once again against the German panzers. In the Salerno operation, an M10 nicknamed Jinx, commanded by Sergeant Edwin Yost of the 636th Battalion, became the war's first M10 ace by destroying 5 Panzer IVs during a German counterattack. France, however, was a far different story. There, against mighty tanks such as the Tiger, the M10 turned out to be an inadequate response. It had to be replaced by something more powerful. In response to increasing concerns about the threat posed by more powerful German tanks, the Ordnance Department began exploring larger caliber guns for tank destroyers even before D-Day. Drawing inspiration from the effectiveness of the German 88mm gun in anti-tank warfare, they focused on adapting the 90mm anti-aircraft gun for this purpose. The gun was initially tested on an M10 chassis, but this led to even greater turret balance issues and required a larger ammunition storage capacity. To address these challenges, engineers developed an entirely new turret with a power traverse system, improved balance, and increased storage. The result was the prototype 90mm gun motor carriage T-71. The series of trials resulted in several refinements, including the addition of a muzzle brake and modifications to the anti-aircraft machine gun mount. These adjustments culminated in the final version, which was standardized as the 90mm gun motor carriage M36. The M36 tank destroyer was essentially a scaled-up version of the M10, featuring a more spacious turret to accommodate the larger 90mm gun and improved armor protection. The gun shield was 3 inches thick, while the side plates were 1¼ inches thick. To balance the heavier gun, a larger counterweight was added. Additionally, the turret ring and mount were reinforced to withstand the increased stresses during firing. The M36 was officially introduced June 1, 1944, just 5 days before the Normandy landings. Recognizing the urgent need for a tank destroyer capable of combating German Panzers and Tigers, the Army ordered the production of 1,400 units. To meet this demand, 500 existing M10A1s were sent for conversion. By July 1944, all M10 equipped tank destroyer battalions were scheduled for conversion to the M36. However, the first M36 tank destroyers did not arrive in France until early September 1944, when they were issued to the 1st U.S. Army. Following preparation and training, the M36s saw their first combat in October 1944 along the German border. The M36 was considered an improvement over the M10, particularly in engagements with Panzer tanks. However, even its 90mm gun struggled to reliably penetrate the Panzer's glasses plate at ranges beyond 500 yards. To compensate, crews had to aim for the Panzer's turret or fire multiple rounds at the glasses to achieve penetration. Attacking a Panzer from the side was a whole different story. An M36 from the 776 Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged a Panzer at 1,500 yards. After disabling its track, it fired a side shot, destroying its turret with a catastrophic internal explosion. Tank Destroyer battalions made field modifications to address the M36's deficiencies. Crews added sandbags to the hull for additional protection against German Panzerfausts and relocated the 50 caliber machine gun from the rear to the turret's front to improve its effectiveness in engaging infantry. While the open turret design offered excellent flexibility and provided an easy escape route if the vehicle was hit, it also left the crew vulnerable to sniper fire and artillery bursts. To address this vulnerability, some units experimented by adding armored covers. After September 1944, tank battles decreased due to significant German losses in Normandy and Lorraine, reducing the urgency to field additional M36s. By the time of the Battle of the Bulge in December of 1944 and renewed encounters with German heavy armor, including King Tigers, the M36 were still outnumbered by the M10. By January 1945, 6 tanker battalions were operating M36s. That same month, an M36 from the 776 Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged a Jagdtiger, the largest and most heavily armored vehicle of World War II. The American crew skillfully flanked the German position and fired a single armor-piercing round from 900 yards. The shot triggered an internal ammunition fire, causing a massive explosion that destroyed the vehicle and blew apart its superstructure. This encounter was a superb example of M36's capabilities when used by a skillful and experienced crew. Neither the M10 or M36 were favored by Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Bruce, the head of tank destroyer planning. He criticized these vehicles for being as fast as the M4 tank but offering less armor protection. Bruce envisioned an ideal tank destroyer as a fast, lightly armored vehicle equipped with a powerful gun, asserting that speed was a crucial element of tank destroyer doctrine. His perspective was influenced by a study conducted by the Tank Destroyer School, which analyzed the performance of a battalion in Tunisia. The study concluded that tank destroyers had achieved a 3-to-1 kill ratio by outmaneuvering and outshooting a numerically and technically superior enemy force. The quest for such a destroyer began already in December 1941. Over a year of experimentation with various guns and chassis designs culminated in a prototype designated the T-70 76mm gun motor carriage. The first T-70 pilot was completed in April of 1943, with testing beginning in June at Camp Hood and Aberdeen Proving Ground. In March 1944, the prototype was standardized as the 76mm gun motor carriage M18. The M18 featured a unique purpose-built chassis with lighter armor and components compared to Sherman-based designs. These weight-saving measures, combined with a Continental R975C4 radial engine producing 400 horsepower, contributed to the vehicle's remarkable speed. In fact, the M18 was the fastest tracked armored vehicle of World War II, capable of reaching speeds of up to 55 miles an hour on roads. Like other U.S. tank destroyers, the M18 featured an open-top turret. However, its armor was thinner compared to other designs. The gun shield, angled at 60 degrees, was 3/4 inch thick, while the side plates were only half an inch thick, offering minimal protection against nearly all German armored vehicles. The M18 was equipped with an electro-hydraulic turret traverse mechanism, enhancing its responsiveness in combat. The main armament was the 76mm M1A2 gun, an upgraded version of the 76mm gun used on later models of the M4 Sherman tank. When firing armor-piercing rounds, the gun could penetrate approximately 120mm of armor at 500 yards, making it effective against most German tanks. However, it struggled at longer ranges against heavily armored vehicles such as the Tiger. The M18 tank destroyer introduced several innovations that distinguished it from other designs. It was the first U.S. armored vehicle to feature torsion bar suspension, which provided superior performance compared to traditional vertical volute spring systems. Additionally, the engine was mounted on a retractable frame, allowing for easier field repairs. However, initial production models faced several technical issues due to a rush production schedule driven by Army demands, which led to manufacturing beginning before testing was completed. Problems with the powertrain hindered the M18's ability to climb steep slopes. These and other defects were addressed by the Buick Motor Division, the vehicle's manufacturer, and by October 1943, most of the issues had been resolved. The M18 was designed to meet ambitious production targets: 1,000 units in 1943, 8,000 in 1944, and 4,300 in 1945. During its production, Buick launched a publicity campaign to highlight the vehicle's performance. As part of this effort, they coined the nickname Hellcat, a marketing term that was never officially adopted by the Army. Despite this, the name Hellcat became widely associated with the M18, reflecting its reputation as a fast and agile tank destroyer. By the autumn of 1944, only a modest number of M18 Hellcats had been deployed to the European theater of operations. 5 battalions were equipped with the vehicle by October, and this number increased to 9 by the Battle of the Bulge in December. The slow adoption of the M18 was primarily due to firepower limitations. Its 76mm gun offered no significant advantage over the 3-inch gun on the M10, and many units favored the M10 for its more functional crew compartment. The M18's speed and mobility, while impressive on paper, were rarely advantageous in combat. A post-war study concluded that its high road speed was often unnecessary and restricted by the available road network. Once engaged in battle, the M18's thin armor and open turret design forced crews to operate cautiously, effectively negating the speed advantage. The M18 Hellcat first saw combat in May 1944 during operations at the Anzio beachhead in Italy. Early evaluations by the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion underscored concerns about its thin armor. As a result, M18s were primarily assigned to reconnaissance missions rather than frontline tank destroyer roles. In July 1944, the M18 was introduced in France as part of Patton's Third Army during Operation Cobra. Although initially met with skepticism by some units, the Hellcat's mobility proved advantageous during rapid advances in Brittany. However, its role often diverged from its intended purpose. In many instances, the M18 was used to provide infantry support or guard supply convoys rather than engage enemy tanks. In September 1944, during the Lorraine campaign, the Hellcat finally capitalized on its speed to execute flanking maneuvers and engage German panzer tanks from advantageous positions. Crews quickly learned to target the panzer's gun mantlet or flanks, as its frontal armor was impervious to the M18's 76mm gun. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the M18's mobility once again proved invaluable. Its ability to traverse difficult terrain and reposition rapidly allowed it to provide effective support for infantry units. By this stage of the war, however, the limitations of its 76mm gun were increasingly apparent, particularly against heavily armored German tanks. Crews appreciated the M18 primarily for its speed and ease of maintenance, but its vulnerabilities remained significant. Its limited firepower and weak armor often left crews at considerable risk during combat. Post-war analysis concluded that these shortcomings significantly constrained the M18's effectiveness as a tank destroyer. Overall, the M10, M36, and M18 may not have fully succeeded in a lasting doctrine of seek, strike, destroy, but they were undoubtedly effective fighting units during World War II. Military historian Hugh Cole summed up their effectiveness during the Battle of the Bulge with, quote, "Tank destroyers are clearly traceable in the Ardennes fighting as over and over again influencing the course of battle. With their mobility and the firepower, America's tank destroyers played a crucial role in neutralizing the formidable German panzers." Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and share it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for our next video. Stay tuned.